What's up, guys? I'm here today to start a new segment on my channel for the rest of 2026, The Road to Doomsday. Now, I realize that channels like New Rockstars are doing the same thing, talking about previous Marvel projects over the last 20 plus years, but we obviously have a lot more time between now and Avengers Doomsday, so why not talk about certain movies from the Marvel side of cinema that I haven't talked about on here, or at least ones that I have talked about, but I want to try to give a more up-to-date analysis on, starting off with the Ben Affleck Daredevil from 2003. Okay, look, I've been aware of this movie's reputation for quite a while, ever since I started movie reviews back in 2013 or 14. This isn't exactly held in a high regard, and I would say it's actually pretty negative, even though there are some people who enjoy it as a guilty pleasure, which is totally fine. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I had a chance to rewatch this movie last night. I haven't watched it probably in 20 some odd years, but I did remember a good chunk of it before last night. As for my own verdict, it's not awful, but it's not good. I'd say the biggest problem is that it's extremely bland. Nothing really that makes it stand out. I mean, it does kind of stand out with certain aspects, but not for the better, if you know what I mean. Such as Colin Farrell as Bullseye. But we'll get to that. This movie's written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, starring Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, the late Michael Clark Duncan, Colin Farrell, Joe Pantoliano, and even Jon Favreau, who went on to be Happy Hogan in the MCU. This came out in February of 2003, when the genre was in a very different place compared to where it is right now. We had Spider-Man in the previous year, and the first X-Men about 2.5 or 3 years prior to this one. And even before that, you had Wesley Snipes' Blade. So the genre was starting to gain some momentum back then. Unfortunately, with this one and Ang Lee's Hulk, this is considered to be amongst the growing pains of the genre. Clear signs that the genre was starting to mature, but when you eat a watermelon, you do have to spit out a few seeds along the way, unless you do actually like the seeds. This, unfortunately, is not a good seed. The plot is basically Matt Murdock is a lawyer by day, vigilante by night, who is fighting injustice in the streets of Hell's Kitchen, his neighborhood, which is on the west side of Manhattan, and it's officially known as Clinton, but people still refer to it as Hell's Kitchen, and I think it's a thing in the Marvel comics, and this, of course, is based off of the character of the same name from the Marvel Universe, Daredevil, created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett. And I think you also have some elements of the Frank Miller run with Daredevil. I know he's written a few graphic novels for him, and Frank Miller actually makes a cameo appearance in here as one of the guys that Bullseye kills by throwing a pen into the guy's forehead. I think it's somewhat appropriate for Frank Miller since he's not exactly a lighthearted storyteller like Stan Lee is. Nothing against Frank Miller personally, although I think he's a little too negative. Not to get too deep into that, but as opposed to Stan Lee, who loved just about everything that he saw with the adaptations of his creations, Frank Miller, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, he seems to not like any adaptation of anything that he's ever made, whether it's Daredevil or Batman. Oddly enough, I think Daredevil's kind of like the Batman of the Marvel Universe, except for perhaps Iron Man. But Daredevil is basically a vigilante protecting the streets of his neighborhood, Hell's Kitchen, and he has to go up against this crime lord known as the Kingpin. It's an origin story of sorts, I would say, for the Daredevil character. We see his childhood in the first 15 minutes or so, and how he became blind when he had this accident of toxic waste spraying across his eyes. His father, Jack Murdock, was the local boxer in Manhattan, and Matt spots him one day at the docks trying to extort money off of this guy who's in a lot of debt, runs away in shame, and he gets caught in this accident which sprays the toxic waste into his eyes, giving him his radar sensibilities. And I guess we're just going to go right into it with spoilers and all. If you somehow have never seen the Ben Affleck Daredevil, it's been over 20 years, so hey, balls in your court. I would say this sequence of him as a kid is probably the strongest part. Even if there's some parts of it that I'm not really jiving with, such as the musical choices and the stereotypical bullies that are antagonizing him in the alleyway, which the lead bully is Robert Eiler, who you might know as AJ Soprano from The Sopranos. Seeing him in this movie, I thought, oh my god. I can't really tell if his father Tony would be proud of him or upset with him.
It's undermining. And it's the kind of stuff I'm teaching my kids not to do. So I don't want to hear it again. End of subject.
Okay, all that aside, I actually do like seeing him as a kid, getting the hang of his sensibilities and learning how to fight back against the bullies. The radar sequence effects I think are actually really cool to look at. Probably the only advantage I'll give this over the Charlie Cox Daredevil. This one he has more of a clear way of still being able to see his surroundings, even if he's legally blind. The sound effects that are reverberating on all these objects around him, it helps him see what's right in front of him. Now, I'm not really sure. I think this is a thing in the comics. If you could let me know, just let me know. Some of the musical choices, though, I think are kind of odd. Like when he's flicking the speed bag, between that and cutting to his father in the boxing ring, and then him fighting the bullies in the alleyway, which is a precursor to that stupid-ass fight scene that we get between him and Jennifer Garner later on. I think this is a decent way for us to get inside Matt Murdock's head and understand his origins and how he became the man without fear. His father ends up being murdered in an alleyway by some thugs who work for his boss, who demanded that he take the fall in the ring, but he refuses to. I see this as kind of the combination of Uncle Ben and Thomas and Martha Wayne thrown into one. Then we jump ahead into the future where he's partnered with Foggy Nelson, played by Jon Favreau, defending those who can't fend for themselves, basically helping the little guy. Doesn't really give him much income to go off of, but Matt Murdock actually feels pretty confident about this, and he'd rather help out the ones who truly need it, instead of settling for the ones who are rich and guilty, which is what Foggy tries to get him to do. And I have to say, Jon Favreau is probably the best actor in this whole movie, even if his character doesn't really have a whole lot to do other than just being the comic relief. Jon Favreau's natural comedic timing is always a joy for me, and he weirdly has this obsession with alligators in the sewers.
The alligators in the sewer.
The alligators. So you're saying there are alligators in the sewers?
No,
Because you're changing your position on this one.
I'm explaining
Do you or do you not concede that there are alligators in the sewers?
Something tells me that he would certainly enjoy a conversation with John Blake.
Well, shouldn't you be telling your superior officers about this?
They asked me if he saw any giant alligators.
But this is where the problems with the movie start to become more apparent. Like when Matt dresses up as Daredevil going off to find Jose Quesada, who manages to get away scot-free after a domestic abuse case. He dives off of the edge of this building from an extremely high place, landing on a window washer, and he's doing all these insane jumps into the air from one building to the next. How exactly is this guy not breaking his legs? Because isn't the point of Daredevil that he's just a normal human being with skills, kind of like Batman? Because I think it's basically, like I said earlier, he's just a normal guy with no superpowers. The only difference is,
I'm rich.
I know it's a nitpick, but on my end, it's just so glaringly obvious. And his bed or his coffin lays down in a pool of water so he can't hear all the sounds going on inside the city. Which I do kind of like that detail where he's able to kind of hone in on just one voice. There's a lot of swooshing from the water, so that way he doesn't have to listen to all the craziness going on outside those walls. But how is he gonna know what time to wake up? Maybe they explain it in the movie, I don't know. But I've always found that stuff to be kind of peculiar. And throughout these scenes, we don't really get to know Matt Murdock as a person. We do understand what his origins were with his father and how he became legally blind. Besides that, what else? I mean, he has this arc where he decides not to be the bad guy when he kills people. I guess that's a thing in the comics where Daredevil does kind of break the rules a little bit as opposed to Batman, who has his no-killing rule. I mean, I do kind of like seeing that arc play out. But the problem is we don't really get much time with Matt Murdock. Outside of his father, there's really nothing else that we get to see with him. It's like he's keeping everybody in an arm's distance. The only person that he really seems to connect with on a personal level is Elektra when the two start to hang out and eventually date. And there's a good amount of narration from Ben Affleck throughout the movie where he wonders if he can make a difference, and some days he feels pretty confident about it, other days not so much. Given that this neighborhood in New York is kind of a shitty place to live in, I don't blame him for feeling that way, but it's really just being told and not really shown what makes his character click. I personally don't mind Ben Affleck as Daredevil. I actually think he's a solid choice for the character. And there's a few moments in here where I can actually picture him putting his own stamp on the character and making it stand out. The problem is the writing from Mark Steven Johnson. There's really no moments that Affleck is given by Johnson to really show what he's capable of. Segueing into Jennifer Garner as Elektra. Now, I've seen Jennifer Garner in other stuff, and I actually really like her. But being real, I'm not a fan of her portrayal in this one. I don't mind her in Deadpool and Wolverine. Similar to Andrew Garfield in Spider-Man No Way Home, she was probably best utilized over there. When you have the MCU on your side, chances are you're going to be okay. In this situation, I feel like she was miscast. And some of you pointed out to me that Catherine Zeta-Jones would have been a better pick. I completely agree with you there. Similar to Matt Murdock, though, we're not really given much focus on Elektra. We know that her mother died, which is a similarity that she shares with Matt Murdock with his father. And she goes on a revenge spree when she believes that Daredevil killed her father, Nicholas, who leaves the crime syndicate run by the Kingpin. And we also don't really get to know what his deal's all about either. We just hear through the dialogue from the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, that Elektra's mother was killed some time ago when she was a child. And then when Nicholas starts to leave, he starts to have a target placed on his back too by the Kingpin. In fact, her father, Eric Avari, if I'm getting the name correct, those of you who watched the series The Chosen, you might recognize him as Nicodemus. But all this stuff that occurs in the second and third acts, it doesn't resonate with me at all because there's not enough focus that's given to any of these characters. Matt is probably the most well-rounded character out of all of these people in here, but even then, nobody's given the proper moment to shine and show what's driving them or what their motivations and desires are. And that's basically the reason why the death of Elektra's father does nothing for me. We don't know anything about this guy, really. We only see him twice before he dies. And what exactly led him to leave Kingpin in the first place? Was there something that he did or that he saw during his dealings with him that made him realize, okay, I don't want any part of this anymore? I don't know. They never tell us. Now, I know there's an extended cut of this movie, which I have not seen, and I don't really think I have any interest in it. From what I've heard, it doesn't really add much more clarity to this. I'm talking about the theatrical edition. But what I'm trying to get at is that this movie doesn't really give us enough time to get a grasp on what these characters are dealing with. Take Cliff Robertson's Uncle Ben, for example. It's a limited amount of screen time he gets before Uncle Ben dies, but it's the correct dialogue and interactions that he has with Peter and May that helps us understand why this character is so important to Peter Parker. We get some of that with Matt's father, Jack, but not with Elektra's father. Now that I've mentioned it, Colin Farrell as Bullseye? Ugh. Don't get me wrong, Colin Farrell's an exceptional actor. I've seen him in other stuff, obviously as the Penguin in The Batman. I also really liked him in Seven Psychopaths, so I know what he's capable of. But my god, is Bullseye insufferable in here. I don't find him in the least bit amusing. I've heard some people say that they like that about him and that he's actually having fun with the character. Perhaps, yes, but for me, this is way too much. In fact, I would say this is almost very similar to Paul Giamatti in Amazing Spider-Man 2, although not that hokey and crazy. Bullseye at the very least is threatening here. You know that when he has something sharp that can kill you?
You better run, squirrel!
He's a hitman who never misses unless he has a confrontation with Daredevil, hired by the Kingpin to kill Elektra's father. And like with the other characters, we don't get to know Bullseye and what his deal is. What made him want to be this assassin? What made him good at hitting his targets, being an efficient killer? Which is kind of freaky with his introduction when he's hanging out in that Irish bar, taking pieces of this paperclip and throwing it into the guy's neck, who called him an Irish piece of trash. Okay, word to the wise, don't ever say that in an Irish bar. Ever. But then there's Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin, who I guess is a little hammy and all ha ha ha, I'm the Kingpin. But it is a breath of fresh air in comparison to Bullseye. And there's not a whole lot of time that's given to the Kingpin. We hear just a slight hint of his backstory that he grew up in the Bronx somewhere before his big fight with Daredevil. Clearly this guy is intimidating, and Kingpin is supposed to be this big, fat guy, but one of the strongest men around, and that was Stan Lee's intention when he created him back in the day. All that fat is basically muscle, and that if he got his hands on you, he would snap you in half like a breadstick. I will say, I actually do like Michael Clark Duncan in this role. God rest his soul. What an incredible actor, and I hope and pray wherever he is on the other side, he now understands the impact that he's made on so many people. In fact, I think Marvel liked it so much that they brought him back for a voicing role for the same character in the MTV edition of Spider-Man back in the day. And it's revealed in the fight between Daredevil and Bullseye in the church that Kingpin was the one who killed Matt's father. They show this silhouette where we don't see his face, but he throws this red rose onto Jack's body. And then he puts another red rose into Nicholas's pocket, giving us an idea of, wait a minute. And then Bullseye mentions that whole red rose thing, it's not really my thing, but he loves that shite. Which causes Matt to remember the red rose that he found on his father's body, and he realizes that his father was killed by Wilson Fisk. I kind of like how that comes full circle that Kingpin created Daredevil, but even then, I still don't feel that emotional catharsis that's required when they have their big fight. Because again, Matt doesn't want to become the bad guy as he scares this poor kid in this hallway. Again, it's not really given a lot of focus. Now, I realize I'm jumping around here, but I found it kind of interesting seeing certain faces pop up where I go, oh my god, that person's in here. Oh, that person's in here. Oh. That person's in this movie too? Such as Leland Orser, who plays Wesley, Kingpin's right-hand man. Ellen Pompeo as Karen Page, you might recognize her from Grey's Anatomy. And Joe Pantoliano as Ben Urich, a journalist for the New York Post, who's determined to reveal the truth about the Daredevil that everybody else considers to be an urban myth. And of course, we get a Stan Lee cameo when Matt stops him from walking onto the street being hit by a car.
Oh, come on, man. I'm throwing you gold.
Give me my money.
Why?
I've seen it. Come on.
All right, well, but have you seen this?
But going into the technical and aesthetic side of things, or basically all the filmmaking techniques that are in here, the opening sequence I think is very similar to the 2002 Spider-Man opening credits. The design of the buildings, which look very computer generated, which that's kind of an obvious thing that's going to happen as the movie ages from 2003 onward. Although hearing the music from Graham Revell, hopefully I got that name correct, it does sound like a mix of Danny Elfman's Spider-Man theme and Michael Kamen's original X-Men theme, from the first X-Men anyway, and perhaps a little bit of Danny Elfman's score from the Ang Lee Hulk. And I actually do like the detail of how we see the names of the cast and crew originally in Braille, but then it translates into normal written English. When it comes to the action scenes, it's a toss-up for me. Some of the personal fighting that goes on when he's hunting down Osei Quesada, I don't mind that stuff. Some of the stunt work is decent, actually, and I like that it's actually a stunt guy or Ben Affleck fighting off all these thugs, which, going back to what I was saying earlier with the other comic book entries at the time, this sequence is very similar to the 2000 X-Men and even a little bit of the first Blade. There's like a cool edginess to it where you feel like you're actually doing something really dark and exciting at the same time. But then it tries to mix in the fantastical aspects of the 2002 Spider-Man when he's doing all these crazy athletic jumps and the CG is not up to par at all. Spider-Man 2002 has some dated CG, but a lot of it still holds up, even by today's standards. Same thing goes for the first two X-Men movies by Bryan Singer. I mean, I kind of like that they're trying to meld those two styles together, but the movie takes itself quite seriously to the point where it almost comes off as really cheesy and over the top. When you have Colin Farrell's performance as Bullseye mixed in with some of the darker elements from Matt Murdock and his angst that he's experiencing deep down, for me, both of those tones don't feel like they're properly meshed together, if you know what I mean. The Daredevil suit, I think, looks perfectly fine, although it's a little too leathery in certain shots. It almost looks kind of like a simple spandex. I know it's easy for me to judge in comparison to Charlie Cox's portrayal, and I'm trying not to go too much into that. I'm saving that for a later time. Yes, I'm going to be revisiting the Daredevil series pretty soon. But then there's the musical choices. No, I'm not talking about the score. I'm talking about the soundtrack. There's a song from Nickelback, and two songs from Evanescence. My Immortal, which you hear in the funeral scene when Elektra buries her father, and Bring Me to Life when she's training to fight against Daredevil. And ever since, this movie and that song are synonymous for me. Now, I mentioned some of the stylized action when Daredevil's making all these crazy leaps. The fight scene he has with Elektra in the schoolyard, that is easily one of the dumbest moments that I've ever witnessed in entertainment. Going into the tone, it feels so weird. These little poses that they give towards each other, it's like, what the hell is this? And Matt is actually doing some really inappropriate stuff by grabbing her to get her attention instead of just saying, hey, excuse me, can we talk? Matt, I know that you're blind. You should know better than that. And of course, fitting in with the movie's dark tone, there are moments where it does get really violent. Like when Bullseye throws Daredevil's cane into the chest of Nicholas, or when he throws Elektra's sword right into the palm of her hand. Yeah, I felt that. That has gotta hurt. And then of course he stabs her to death, killing her. Supposedly anyway. Which is hinted at the end when Matt finds her necklace written in Braille, giving us the hint that Elektra actually survived. I don't know if they explained it in the solo outing that she had, Elektra. I haven't watched that movie in years, so I don't remember how that went down, but we'll get to that eventually. Oh, and for what it's worth, I actually like that this movie focuses on Matt being a Catholic. Again, even though there's not a lot of focus given to him as a person, potentially it could lead to some really great scenes, but there's really not enough of it, as opposed to the Netflix series which came out 12 years later. And there was actually supposed to be a sequel to this, but of course we all know how that turned out. It all fell through. And if you were to read or watch any interviews with Affleck, whenever this movie comes up, he makes it quite clear how he feels about it. But really, the Ben Affleck Daredevil is not awful. For me, it's just mediocre and uninteresting. Some cool parts and some nice moments here and there, and some decent action sequences that I could see why some people would have a good time watching this, if they're talking about it in the guilty pleasure sense anyway. But for me, it's not enough to save it. Now, I would certainly not put this in the same category with Batman and Robin or Halle Berry's Catwoman. But if I were to rank this among the comic book movie entries out there, it wouldn't exactly be high on my list either. So that's all I have for you guys on the 2003 Daredevil. Thank you guys so much for watching. Just let me know down below what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it. And if you'd like to see more from me, just hit like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.